Huh? What was that? My God. What the hell is that thing? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Iowa Off-Kilter. My name is Kelly Michael Bevins.
And I'm Gavin Aronson.
First, we wanted to thank everyone who listened to our first episode. The reception and the feedback we got was extremely encouraging.
And if you haven't listened to that one yet, you can find it on our website, iowaoffkilter.com. It's about Norman Baker and the Cedar County Cow War.
Big shout out to Ryan, who was our very first Patreon subscriber. Our social media accounts are now up and running, and you can find them on our website, so please like or follow or share if you enjoy the show. What about hate mail, Gav? We got any hate mail since last episode?
Still nothing in the inbox.
Well, let's check it again after this episode. But for now, let's dive into a series of monster sightings from 1903. Accounts described it as an 8-foot bat-like creature that was said to live in an abandoned mine outside of Van Meter.
The original account of these sightings was documented by a resident of the town named H.H. Phillips, and it was published in a newspaper called the Des Moines Daily News.
Of course, we're referring to the Van Meter Visitor. Now, I'd go so far as to say that the Van Meter Visitor is Iowa's most well-known cryptid. And I'd have to say it's my favorite.
And if you don't know what a cryptid is, it's defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as an animal such as Sasquatch or the Loch Ness Monster that has been claimed to exist but never proven to exist. But the dictionary also mentions that they don't have to be supernatural in nature.
It actually says Sasquatch or the Loch Ness Monster in the dictionary?
Well, you just told me the other day that you saw amazeballs in the dictionary, too.
Yeah, I guess I'm not that surprised. But enough pleasantries, Gavin. Let's get to the story.
Van Meter Mystery Not Solved. Van Meter, October. The mystery that has served to considerably excite the residents is still unsolved. Queer noises are heard. Hideous apparitions are seen and uncanny lights move around in a mysterious manner. The account that's sent to newspapers by H.H. Phillips was, however, considerably exaggerated. It seems as though the
In the early morning hours of September 29th, 1903, Ulysses G. Griffith was returning to Van Meter after making his rounds in the area selling farm equipment for Griffith Brothers Implement, a company he co-owned, when he noticed a light in the distance. While a single light may have been a mundane sight to a resident of the town, Griffith was not aware of a light installed atop the Mather and Greg's building on Main Street. As he drew nearer to it, his first thought was that it might be a burglar, but he quickly changed his mind when the light leapt onto another building on the opposite side of the street. After witnessing this, he was convinced that it wasn't the work of a thief. But as he drifted off to sleep after returning to his home, he couldn't help but wonder what he'd just seen. The next morning, still perturbed by the last night's events, Griffith shared his story with others in the town. They reacted with confusion. Griffith, who sat on the village council and was a member of the Modern Woodmen of America and local Masonic Lodge, wasn't known for hyperbole. But in the days ahead, their skepticism would lessen as others came forward with similar accounts.
It wasn't clear to us at first how Griffith returned to Van Meter that night, but we found an account that said he was driving. This would have been among the first cars introduced in Iowa. According to the state's Department of Transportation, the first automobiles to arrive here were displayed at a fair in Lynn County in 1899. Ford didn't start producing the Model T, or Tin Lizzie, until 1908, although by the following year, according to Collier's magazine, 1 in 34 Iowa farm families owned a car, compared to just 1 in 190 in New York City. Griffith sold farm equipment, but Van Meter at the time was also a mining town. According to an online map from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources of historical mine locations, there are 4 in Van Meter. 3 of them were operated on the northwest side of the town by the Van Meter Coal and Mining Company, Chicago and Van Meter Coal, and, remember this one, the Platte Brick and Coal Company. There's also an unnamed mine to the southeast on the DNR map. The limitations of technology at the time, combined with factors like the depth and darkness of the mines, made the profession a, quote, uniquely dangerous working environment for the miner, according to the National Museum of American History. One of the quickest ways to become a statistic was explosions caused by oil wicks or carbide lamps when they ignited methane gas in the mines. The first hard hat wasn't invented until 1919. Before then, miners wore soft cloth or canvas caps with a bracket that held a lamp. Could this explain what Griffith saw atop the 2 buildings that night in 1903? If, say, there were 2 burglars and he saw lights from the lamps of the caps of each of them at different times? According to the National Museum of American History, carbide lamps often came with a reflector, allowing this brighter flame to be directed and giving the miner a wider range of light. This might have been more likely than a light produced by electricity. By the turn of the century, a number of Iowa families had access to electricity, but this was more common in urban areas than in smaller farming communities. Even by 1930, only about 10% of Americans living in rural areas had electricity.
Anyone who's ever taken an in-depth look at this story is familiar with the name Chad Lewis. He, along with co-authors Noah Voss and Kevin Lee Nelson, literally wrote the book on the Van Meter Visitor.
My name is Chad Lewis, and for the last 25 plus years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Although my background is in the field of psychology, I was one of the 3 co-authors of the book, The Van Meter Visitor.
That book, titled The Van Meter Visitor, A True and Mysterious Encounter with the Unknown, is considered to be the definitive work on the creature and the series of sightings that occurred in 1903. Because of this book, Chad and his co-authors are often credited for popularizing the story of the Van Meter Visitor.
I always like to say we rediscovered it. We were taking a legend trip to Iowa, and we were looking for cases we have never been on, places of hauntings, UFO sightings, sea serpents, monsters, and the like. But we really didn't have that one anchor case. I had the stack of all these old Iowa stories. I thought, well, I'm going to flip through it, and maybe there's something I missed. And that's when I came across the Des Moines papers talking about this giant beast terrorizing a small town of Van Meter, and we said immediately, let's go see what this thing might have been.
Since the rediscovery of the Visitor's story, this trio of authors has been closely entwined with the mysterious sightings of the early 20th century. Co-author Kevin Lee Nelson had his own unique contribution to the creature's lore.
You know, the newspapers called it, some flying beast or a reign of terror or the hideous monster. As we were planning the book, we didn't want to just call it the Van Meter creature, and Kevin said, well, we don't know what it was, but we do know it visited Van Meter. So the alliteration of Van Meter Visitor sounded really well. So, yeah, Kevin coined that term on our way back from Iowa to Wisconsin.
But the Van Meter Visitor is far from the only cryptid in Iowa. So what made these three choose it as their primary focus?
When we made our way down to Van Meter, I thought it was going to be a short trip. So I thought, great, we'll just pop in, talk to the Historical Society, talk to historians, old-timers. We'd find out it was a hoax. It'd be really fun. As soon as we pulled into the Van Meter Library, we were amazed that people took it seriously, and that once we started digging, a lot of the evidence pointed that it might not have been a hoax.
Since the trio's pivotal visit to the Van Meter Library, the town has embraced the story of the Visitor as part of its history. Every year, on the anniversary of the sightings, cryptozoological enthusiasts from around the country travel to Van Meter.
When my co-authors and I went to Van Meter and started meeting some of the locals, we told them that they should have something like this to celebrate the legend, whether they believed it or not. It's just great fun. So they decided they were going to do a festival celebrating the Visitor story, and they wanted it to be hands-on, that not only did they bring in speakers from around the country about cryptids and weirdness, but also blended it with Iowa topics. The walking tour is my favorite because you can actually walk the 3 blocks of downtown Van Meter and see the bank or the bank manager shot out the front window shooting at the Visitor. There's nothing like it in America.
On September 30th, at approximately 1 a.m., one day after U.G. Griffith's encounter with the strange light, Dr. Fred Alcott was awoken from his slumber in his bedroom in a back room of his practice by a bright light that suddenly shone in his face from outside the building. A plucky little fellow, as he was described in the original account, quote, Alcott and his heart raced from bed as his skilled hand wrapped around his nearby gun of immense proportions. Alcott did not believe that the source of the light was a late-night visitor in need of emergency medical care. But not recognizing what it might be instead, he stepped outside to investigate and was confronted by what he would later describe as a half-human and half-animal being with great bat-like wings and a single blunt horn protruding from its forehead. Alcott fired 5 shots, hoping to slay the beast with his gun of immense proportions. But none of the shots seemed to affect it. The shock of the seemingly unaffected beast was enough to send Alcott back inside, a single shot left in his gun. He locked the doors and windows, lay down with the gun, and awaited the morning light. According to the book, Dr. Alcott was, quote, reported to have kept that final round as to have one last line of defense should this mysterious creature attack. Whether the final bullet was to be used on himself or the visitor is lost to history. While the Platte Brick and Coal Company mine itself is at the center of Van Meter's paranormal history, an often overlooked aspect of the story is the Platte Brick Factory, which sits mere feet from the now shuttered mine shaft. The website that hosted accounts of sightings at the factory has been shut down, so we asked Chad Lewis what he knew about the reported haunting of the building's remains.
When we first got there, we had heard stories that mostly young teenagers from the region would often go out there thinking it was haunted. They would see shadowy figures out there and bricks flying on their own as though thrown by some unseen force, but everyone had forgotten the visitor legend, so they just chalked it up to a haunting.
There's been a fair amount of speculation about the source of the creepy sounds. According to the book, some have reported inhuman, quote, screeching and screams that they believe may have been the din of miners and tile workers who died on the property. Others have argued that the source of the racket was the visitor itself. In the time since these accounts were published, people have continued to make the trip to Van Meter to investigate.
On October 1st, as Van Meter's town clock struck 1 a.m., Clarence Peter Dunn heard an unusual sound that he would later describe as similar to a wild animal gasping for air or someone being strangled. A bright light suddenly appeared. So bright, he said, it nearly blinded him. As the light's focus shifted onto the room in which he stood, Dunn's sight acclimated to the dark of the night enough to recognize a great form of some kind. Dunn was the bank's cashier and was present that night to keep watch from inside its lobby, concerned that burglars might be the reason behind the recent rumors spreading throughout the town. When things took a turn for the Off-Kilter, he fired a buckshot shell from his shotgun in the direction of the mysterious light, shattering the window of the bank in the process. Suddenly, all was silent. The light was gone, and any trace of the creature vanished into the night. A graduate of Adel High School and Capital City Commercial College, Dunn was no dummy. He waited until sunrise, then went outside to look for evidence of the creature, finding no body but what he described as great three-toed tracks. He made a plaster cast of the tracks to preserve the evidence. We mentioned earlier that the Van Meter Visitor is probably Iowa's most well-known cryptid, but it's far from the only one. In the mid-1990s, there were 3 reports of phantom kangaroos, 2 independent sightings southwest of Iowa City, and 1 in Ottumwa. And in 1999, a woman named Lois Eckhart came upon an animal that looked like a deer, but it had a bigger belly and a boxy nose and a tail too long for a deer.
I've never heard of a kangaroo walking on 4 feet. That kind of sounds more like a mountain lion.
Yeah, I don't know how you get to kangaroo from that. Sounds to me like a dog.
It certainly wasn't a dragon, but in Burlington and Bedford, there have been a number of purported dragon sightings. The most recent sighting that we came across was in 2005. They've been described as flying serpents, writhing and twisting with long snake-like bodies and bat-like wings. Some have said their heads were shaped like a seahorse, and they had great scales which glistened in the sunlight. There's another account on the Cryptid Wiki page on Iowa dragons, attributed only to someone named Zeus.
That's how you pronounce that?
And Zuez, pardon my mispronunciation if I got that wrong. Here's what Zeus had to say. I live in Iowa too, in Grand Mound. We see dragons like that all the time. They normally come in the harvest time when the moon is really big and red. They often take cows from my neighbor's pasture. I myself have spotted these dragons 6 different times, once in a group of 3. Once I saw a large blue one with 4 wings. Could these dragon sightings have been related to the Van Meter Visitor? Chad Lewis says that's possible.
There was a pastor who was waiting for a friend of his at an appointment. He was in Colfax, Iowa, which is not that far from Van Meter in Des Moines. And he saw what he thought was a dragon flying in the sky. So he went home, Googled Iowa dragon, and the Van Meter Visitor popped up, and he said, that's exactly what I saw in the field in Colfax.
And speaking of dragons, There's one that's said to live in Okoboji Lake. The Cryptid Wiki described it as a powerful mythological creature, something like a cross between a cougar and a dragon. These reports date back to 1903, the same year as the visitor sightings, when a couple in their boat reported seeing large splashes causing huge waves. So large that the couple was in fear of capsizing and left the area. The man claimed he believed it to be a lake serpent or a fish the size of a skiff.
How big's a skiff?
I think it's one step down from dinghy.
Let's go with that.
All right, Skiffy. More recently, in 2001, and I love this story, a woman and her 2 children reported seeing a large, humped body that was 5 feet long with snake-patterned scales and a head that resembled a cross between a lizard and a horse. The creature held its mouth open as if it were taking in oxygen and then charged the dock on which the family sat. It dove underneath the water just before hitting the pole keeping the dock stationary. The resulting collision violently rocked the dock, and the woman and her children quickly made their way back to shore. I wish there were like a dramatic reenactment of this one. Is it possible
Could it be?
that the dragon was actually Bigfoot?
Well, that's just absurd. But it's certainly true that you couldn't really consider any cryptid list complete without a sighting or 2 of Bigfoot. Or in this case, his Sasquatch cousin, the Lockridge Monster. In the fall of 1975, 4 people reported seeing a large, hairy creature in the rural outskirts of Lockridge, a tiny rural town in southeastern Iowa. One claimed it had an ape-like face and that it was known to mutilate and kill farm animals, often not eating the entirety of the kill. In support of this claim were its tracks, found near 4 mutilated, half-eaten turkeys. Another Lockridge resident spotted the creature from her car in an old abandoned farmyard after dark. She said it had a monkey's face and a body covered in hair.
Didn't you know someone who was a Bigfoot encounter survivor?
Yeah, I worked as a prep cook for a few months, and one of my coworkers lived in a small town near Ames, where the restaurant was, and he talked about how he went out in his backyard one time, and there was like woods out back, and he saw Bigfoot.
Did he describe it as like doing that Patterson video thing where it walks a few feet and then sort of turns back and looks at you?
He didn't, but I'm pretty sure there was a wristwatch on his arm.
Yeah. Hold it, Bob. We can see your wristwatch.
On the windy, rainy, early morning of October 2nd, a local named Otto V. White had an encounter of his own. He awoke to a noise from outside the second-story room where he resided, above the Fisher & White hardware and furniture store, a Main Street business that he co-owned. White would later describe a grating, sharply harsh, and pointed noise, which caused an abrupt racket. Aware of the strange reports from the previous 3 nights, he quickly grabbed his gun and ran to a nearby window, which he thrust open only to see nothing amiss. But when his eyes adjusted to the darkness of Van Meter's Main Street, he spotted something near the joist of the telephone pole about 15 feet from his window, and realized that he was staring directly at the beast. With a good vantage point and a reputation as a crack shot, White fired a single round in the direction of the beast. It awoke and responded by focusing its bright light upon him. At that same moment, White was overtaken by a powerful odor emanating from the creature that stupefied him. After that, according to White, his memory went dull, and he could provide no more information about the incident. The shot did not only awaken the beast, it also jolted his neighbor Sidney Gregg from his slumber. Gregg ran outside and saw what he would later describe as a monster that climbed down the telephone pole using its huge beak like a parrot would for balance. Gregg estimated that the creature was at least 8 feet tall, and that the light coming from its forehead was as bright as an electric headlight. He also corroborated White's account of the creature's foul stench. Greg recalled, too, that the creature had huge featherless wings to allow it to move with great leaps, like a kangaroo as the creature's wings flapped. He wondered then if he was dreaming, until the sound of an oncoming train startled the creature, and it crouched as if in a spring, before rising to run on all 4 feet in the direction of the old coal mine. With wings extended, Greg would later add, the creature sailed away. And although Greg had it with him throughout the encounter, his weapon remained unfired as the creature vanished into the night. By the evening of October 2nd, there had now been sightings on 4 consecutive days by 5 established members of the Van Meter community. Speculation and rumors surged throughout the town as residents argued about the origin of the story and the nature of the beast itself. The rumors were heightened by reports from the local miners who worked day and night and claimed to have heard strange sounds for some time coming from deep within the mine shafts. Reacting to the stories, a teacher at the Southside High School named F.L. Martin concluded that the creature was, quote, some sort of antediluvian monster. The town worked itself into a fever pitch. As night fell, the sky illuminated by a nearly full moon of immense proportions. A thunderstorm rolled in the distance to the west of town. We were curious what locals thought about the Van Meter Visitor. So we stopped by a bar and grill called Ambrose Roadhouse, which is about a 5-minute drive from the site of the old Platte mine. Inside, we met a bartender named Morgan, who said she was from the Des Moines area herself, but that her grandparents owned the bar and were from Van Meter.
Do you know what the Van Meter Visitor is?
Oh my god, yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you know about it?
That it's some fucking pterodactyl thing terrorizing the town of Van Meter in what, like
1903.
1903.
Yep.
Okay, born in 1800s.
Yes, yeah. Have you heard of any sightings around here recently?
Not recently, no, because I don't know a lot of people, especially that come in here, that like to talk about shit like that. So I can't even tell you because you're the first people I've talked to about it. Like, I don't know anybody else that knows about it.
How did you find out about it?
Facebook, actually. Last year was the first time I ever heard that there was a festival for it, and I found out after it happened.
Gun to your head. What do you think it was?
Well, I mean, considering the wingspan, I can't just say like a hawk or an eagle, but I mean, you know, I like to believe Mothman is real, so I mean, hey.
People say that the Van Meter Visitor might have been the Mothman.
That's what you're going with? That's what I'm going with, yeah.
There were only a handful of others at Ambrose when we were there. We asked the musician who was playing, a guy named Eric Wright, about the Visitor. He hadn't heard of it. Then we approached some patrons seated at a table.
No idea?
No idea.
Monster what?
Yeah, it was an 8-foot bat they saw.
I've lived in this county my entire life. I've never...
Google it. Van Meter Visitor.
Doing,
it's in Van Meter's Wikipedia.
My opinion is it's all bullshit. You can quote me on that. It's all bullshit.
What that is Toby walking home from the bar when Fat Randy's was open and somebody's trying to translate, so he put those little work lights on his head.
We should probably clarify that we weren't actually in Van Meter at the time, but a neighboring town called DeSoto with a population of just over 1,000, about 200 fewer than Van Meter's. The bar mentioned by the man at the end of that clip, Fat Randy's, was the last bar open in Van Meter itself. According to its website, the establishment was closed for renovations with plans to reopen in April 2020, but it apparently ended up closing for good instead. It was approaching midnight now, about an hour from when the eyewitnesses in 1903 reported seeing the Visitor. So we drove into Van Meter and got as close as we could to the site of the old mine.
Me with my headlamp on. Be funny if there were 2 other guys doing a podcast over there and they saw me and thought I was the Van Meter Visitor. I think we're not trespassing. Well, I guess we're not sure on that one, but I think we're not trespassing.
If we are, we apologize.
Well, I would say it's, lightly hazy out here, the sky? I mean, it's mostly clear, right?
Yeah. We're looking west, out in the direction of the old mine, the Platte mine. We're here just after midnight. Most of the sightings, historically, back in 1903, were around 1 a.m., so we're a little early.
Wonder if it's in the tree above us.
It wasn't. So next, we drove down Main Street, past where U.G. Griffith first spotted the visitor around the same time of day on September 29th, 1903. So it's a small town. What's the population now? Around 900?
No, it was 900 at the time.
Now it's
11 or 1,200.
Forget which way it was.
It's not of immense proportions, I would say. Oh, there's a Bob Feller Museum. Oh, no, it's just a mural. Yeah, did you see the Bob Feller mural?
Yeah. Maybe City Hall shares a building with the Bob Feller museums.
Yeah. Why does Bob Feller get the mural? Like, Meter Visitor should have gotten the mural.
City Hall and the Bob Feller Museum do share a building, by the way. It was almost 1 a.m. now. So before leaving the area, we sought out a different vantage point. The Iowa Veterans Cemetery, which actually has an address in another neighboring town, Adel, but it overlooks Van Meter.
If we can get into the cemetery, it does have a great view of Van Meter. Wow, this is a big cemetery.
Deer.
Oh yeah, there's some deer.
So far all we've seen is a raccoon and 2 deer.
Let's have a look.
To be continued.
The details in the original accounts really provide for a lot of theories around this story. It's actually a widely discussed legend outside of Iowa as well, which I think is for good reason because it's really got it all. It's the unbelievable, but it's rooted in the believable.
So what did you think it was when you first went down that rabbit hole?
I wanted to believe that it was something left over from the prehistoric era because that's very unlikely, but not impossible. So it's something that I've always wanted to happen. But I think the skeptical side of me thought it was probably a great horned owl.
You said I wanted to believe. That reminded me of the X-Files, which is what I first thought about. We talked about doing this episode,
yeah.
And we talked about the monster of the week. The other thing that I thought about really early was the sketch of the Van Meter Visitor, which was actually drawn by Kevin Lee Nelson, who's one of the authors of the book.
Yeah, that's a signed copy by Kevin Lee Nelson, if I'm not mistaken.
The wings look kind of like a cape. That reminded me of Dracula, because Dracula, the book, was by Bram Stoker, came out in 1897. And
6 years before.
Right, yeah. So I looked through newspaper archives from around that era. I didn't find anything in Van Meter itself, but I did find ads in a couple other Iowa papers, the Cedar Rapids Gazette in September 1902, and also the Leon Journal-Reporter from February 1903. The ads list a number of paperback novels for sale for 49 cents apiece, and on both of the lists is Bram Stoker's Dracula.
So your theory is that it might have been someone putting on a show or pretending to be Dracula to scare people, and that's kind of what might explain the visitor?
Possibly, or also, maybe they did see something and the first thing they thought of was something familiar because they just read the book.
That's a good thought.
Yeah, just because like I mentioned the X-Files before, there's so much popular lore and the crossover with pop culture. Another interesting article I found, this is from August 1903, so this is just a month and a half, I guess, before the Van Meter Visitor sightings. This is an article in the Iowa City Press-Citizen. It's a notice of upcoming events. And one of them is the Ringling Brothers Circus coming to town. And among the performers is the Great Dracula.
The Great Dracula. So you got to imagine it's based on Dracula. But I think that the main idea here is that it was of human origin. And I think the light that's reported to be coming from the creature's head in several of the accounts is probably the most compelling of the evidence to support that it was a human.
Of course, if it were a human, you'd have to have an explanation for why there were inhuman sounds reported coming from the mine.
That's very true. That's true. I know in the book they use someone on stilts as a possible explanation for the 8-foot height.
Speaking of the circus.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, and Chad Lewis made a good point when he said that the first couple of nights may have been a prankster, but then he said, who goes out to get shot at 3 nights in a row?
Yeah, he makes a good point.
Let me introduce this one for you because I love this term you came up with, leftover dinosaur. Not the same as the leftover week-old lasagna you get in the fridge. But
yeah, and not related to the bluegrass band Leftover Salmon either. I wanted to start with a cryptid that often draws the comparison to pterodactyls and pterosaurs. We're talking about the ropin, and the ropin is a cryptid that lived in or lives in Papua New Guinea. According to the Cryptid Wiki, the ropin is a large nocturnal creature, often said to be bat-like and sometimes pterosaur-like, although pterosaurs are generally accepted to have been extinct. I feel use of the word generally there is something you would only see in Cryptid Wiki.
The main reason the ropin draws comparisons to the visitor may be because of the reports of a beam of light emanating from its chest.
Yeah, and also that they both had wings and flew. The thing with the ropin is they haven't been reported outside Papua New Guinea, and that's a really long way for this thing to travel.
Yeah, for our next episode, we will be live from Papua New Guinea hunting the ropin.
Yeah, talking to bartenders. So kind of on the same subject, let's talk about that leftover dinosaur theory where, based on physical traits that the accounts held, one might draw the conclusion that it could be a pterosaur or pterodactyl.
You've got to be careful where you get your information about supposed leftover dinosaurs. Many of the researchers and authors who talk about this, write about this, they're actually creationists. This is big in creationist theory, where they're trying to prove their point that humans and dinosaurs coexisted.
Yeah, it's almost like a subculture. But, the leftover dinosaur theory gets brought up in a lot of cryptid cases, and I think it's super unlikely. And then the last thing sort of along these lines is a theory that I didn't even think of until Chad Lewis mentioned it. Is it possible? Did the miners unearth something that was long since tucked away underground? I know demons go hand in hand with this theory.
This is a really fun theory to entertain, but I think more likely, maybe, is that it was a misidentified animal that actually did exist.
It sounds like a lot of people have speculated that it was a creature escaped from either a collector or a zoo or a traveling circus. And that's an interesting theory because it opens up the possibility of the animal being anything and not something that's local to Iowa,
right? Anywhere in the world, even Transylvania.
Or Papua New Guinea. Maybe the ropin hitched a ride with some carnies. There are a couple of animals that don't live around Iowa that would fit the description pretty well. The Bismarck Flying Fox, which is not a fox, is actually the world's largest bat. I mean, giant bat-like creature, and we know that there have been recent sightings of giant bats around Van Meter, so I don't know, is there a secret population of Bismarck Flying Foxes around here from a circus that dropped them off 200 years ago? And then there's also, if we're ruling out the natural territory of animals, the California condor is always pointed at when you're talking about large birds because it is massive.
Yeah, let me consult my field guide here of birds mistaken for the Van Meter visitor. The largest California condors can stand nearly 4.5 feet tall, and they can have a wingspan of about 10 feet.
We do know that there were traveling circuses in the area and traveling animal shows. The Buckley, Darnaby, Carnival, and Zoo was in Muscatine, 12 days before the first sighting of the visitor.
Apparently, the patron of the carnival spat tobacco juice in the eye of a bear. Do you know why he did that, by the way?
No, it seemed just for fun, it sounded like. I think that's just what people did in 1903, right?
It does sound like a good time, and Norman Baker wasn't there yet. The man did get his coat sleeve torn to shreds, deservingly so, it sounds like, but he didn't get sustain any injuries.
I thought that was an interesting story, but even more interesting, on September 24th, just 5 days before the first sighting of the visitor, the Marble Rock Journal published the following article titled "Lion at Large." The people of Polk City in the north end of this county have been terrorized for several weeks by the presence of a large lion, which is said to be roaming the woods and fields in that vicinity and lugging off calves, etc. The children of the community are afraid to venture out in the daytime even, and there is talk of inability to keep the schools in the surrounding country open till the lion, which is supposed to have escaped from some traveling show, is done for.
And there are even more of these stories. On the 26th of September, that's just 3 days before the visitor sightings, something called Bosco's Wild Animal Show broke down while passing through Davenport. And then on September 28th, that's just the day before, the Waterloo Courier ran an article about a huge pelicans in the area. A local had shot and killed one, and they measured its wingspan to be 8 feet 4 inches long. The article also mentions that these pelicans are not native to the area, probably just passing through during migration. A special, beautiful, and mammoth pelican, flying far from its native heath, was shot near here Saturday night by Bert Strayer and killed.
Classic Bert Strayer.
The bird, with a companion, had been in this vicinity for a week, and it is believed that its mate was shot and disabled by a man working for William Crownover. The rufous-necked species abound in the West Indies and in parts of North America, and the ones seen here are apparently of this variety. Because of the rarity of the bird in this locality, Mr. Strayer values his trophy very highly and will endeavor to have it mounted by a taxidermist.
So 5 days before the first sighting, we have a lion loose in Polk City, and the day before the first sighting, there are huge pelicans in the Waterloo area.
Polk City is only about 30 miles away from Van Meter, while Waterloo's about 130 miles away, but it's not hard to imagine a winged animal covering that distance relatively quickly.
Speaking of Iowa, let's talk about some species that are native to Iowa that might have been misidentified for the Van Meter visitor. I think first is the great blue heron, if you've ever been on the Des Moines River, or probably in many of the bodies of water around Iowa, you've seen great blue heron. And they are pretty big.
Yeah, they can grow to 4.5 feet tall and can get up to a 6.5 foot wingspan.
So 4.5 feet tall, we're still 3.5 feet away from the Van Meter visitor. But I think great blue heron is one of the more likely options, in my opinion.
Let's not forget the great horned owl.
Oh, the owls are not what they seem. Yeah, they get pretty big, don't they?
Yeah, so let me pull out my stat sheet again here. They're not as big as the great blue heron. They grow to about 25 inches, and they have wingspans of up to 5 feet.
And since great horned owls are sometimes thought to be behind encounters with aliens, we should talk about the alien theory as well. There's a theory that it might have been an alien or aliens behind the Van Meter visitor, and a lot of that is the lights in the sky that U.G. Griffith saw, but I don't know enough to say whether it was the Greys or little green men or any other type of alien. I don't want to cast doubt. It's just a tough one to speculate on. And also, along the lines of this theory, are not only aliens, but time travelers or other dimensional beings.
In the book, there are a few sketches of the visitor, and one of them is drawn by co-author Kevin Lee Nelson. And that one depicts what's known as a tesseract symbol on the visitor's chest. The tesseract is a 4-dimensional hypercube. And if you don't know what that is, what's important here is that this fits the theme of something that is beyond ordinary human perception. It's a common symbol in paranormal circles.
So we have a lot of theories here. And because of this, we actually thought about contacting an expert, someone who specializes in why people believe what they believe. But it turned out we already had. Chad Lewis has a background in exactly that.
So when I was in high school, I went to interview people who were seeing UFOs. And I happened to study psychology the next fall at college. And that's what I was interested in, why some people believe in this and others do not. So I started studying belief systems and human perception. And that went through graduate school, where I actually ended up doing my master's thesis on students' belief in the paranormal. And I see myself more as almost a folklorist or historian, that I'm really interested in how these stories morph I'm always trying to keep an eye out for misidentification or people trying to hoax, or that they might just be wrong in some of their sightings. And that does happen quite a bit. The signs you would normally think of somebody not being truthful, being nervous, fidgeting, touching their face, those might all be indications of somebody not being honest, but also it could be that they're nervous because their entire belief system has changed. So of course they're going to be a little nervous or a little fidgety. So it's that old question of almost confirmation bias, that when you hear of a sea serpent out on the lake and you start getting more sightings, is it because they're imagining it, or they hear this story of a sea serpent and any lateral wave then becomes a serpent? Or is it that more people hear of it, so they keep an eye out and they're watching closely, so they're going to see it more? And that, I think, is the most difficult question. It's very hard to prove or disprove whether somebody saw something they said they did. Unless you were there with them, it's hard to prove that they did see it. It's hard to prove that they didn't.
On the morning of October 3rd, J.L. Platt Jr. was working at the Platt Tile and Brick Factory, which was still in operation on the grounds of the old mine that had been shut down. Around 1 a.m., he heard sounds emanating from the borehole of this mine, sounds which he described as, quote, Satan or imp-like. As he approached, the moonlight silhouetted two creatures at the mine's entrance, a large one at the front and a small one behind it, both with light shining from their horns. The pair flew away as Platt drew near. But word of this spread fast throughout the town, and although electricity wasn't common in rural homes until the 1920s, those with access to it turned on their lights in hopes of scaring the creatures off. A crowd of men with raincoats and guns gathered near the mouth of the old mine in case the creatures returned to their lair. The men had a simple plan: rid the earth of them when they should return. But nothing happened until the break of dawn. Just before 6 a.m., the larger creature returned with the small creature in tow. The crowd fired a hailstorm of shots at them. The story goes that the reception received would have sunk the Spanish fleet. The creatures responded to the gunshots with their own thunderous and unearthly noises, and by emitting a foul odor, believed to be the same foul odor that O.V. White and Sidney Gregg described. In another parallel to earlier events, the beast seemed unaffected by the gunshots, and the crowd watched in bewilderment as the two creatures made their descent down the 257-foot mine shaft. Later that day, a group of men was assigned to barricade the entrance, and the Van Meter Visitor was scarcely seen again. We say scarcely because there have been other reports. Besides the initial accounts, people have reported sightings of the visitor as far back as the 1980s and as recently as the past few years.
A gentleman told me that he was in the area, he moved to the area not too long ago, and he was driving home at night with his family, his wife and the kids in the back. They were younger, and he saw what appeared to be a giant bat dead on the side of the road. And as he slowed down, he said it looked almost like somebody was in a costume, but it was getting dark. He had his young kids. He didn't want to stop, new to the area. So he went home the next morning, again in the safety of the daylight, went out there, and of course, this thing was gone, whatever it was. And looking back, he now wonders if it was one of these types of creatures, either dead or sleeping, or who knows. But so these stories do happen. I just recently, within the last 2 years, got one from a gentleman that was camping with his girlfriend near Iowa City, which is a little distance from Van Meter. And they swear they saw the visitor or a visitor-like being terrorizing their campground.
These are both great examples of recent activity around the Van Meter Visitor. But as Chad mentioned, it's very difficult to prove an account. So how does this story ever get resolution? That question starts with a problem.
We don't know what happened to that mine in terms of nobody has a record as to when it closed down officially. Did they dynamite it? Did they fill it in? Did they let nature just do its work? Did it flood out? Until recently, the family has not been very interested in exploring it, but it is now in the hands of a younger generation of the family. So we'll see. But I can't tell you how many people say, let's open up the mine and pump out the water and let's see what's in there.
While I think we'd all love to know what's in there, with a 257-foot mine, that would mean a massive excavation effort that would not only be expensive, with such sprawling tunnels, the risk of cave-ins could be high. So what other pathways do we have to solve this mystery?
I think several things could happen. One, my favorite being whatever these things were or are, come back. And you have an ability to document them, capture them. I think it could come forward in somebody's journal of the time with evidence that they hoaxed this. And most notably, H.H. Phillips, who wrote the article, that could come out in his journal of how he made it up, and that would solve it pretty easily. Maybe a photograph would surface of it that somebody had taken at that time, but most likely that would just add more intrigue and mystery than any solving of the mysteries. You know, any case on the internet, no one believes. I mean, the visitor could land in your office right now. You could take a video of it, put it online, and you'd have hundreds of people saying how fake it looked. So that's a great question because, yeah, I don't know.
Perhaps somewhere in the annals of Van Meter history lies the answer. But without hard evidence, we can only speculate on what the Van Meter visitor really was. And, of course, we wanted to know Chad's opinion.
I don't think it was a hoax. I could lean toward it being a misidentified known creature. It certainly would happen at that time. And if hysteria sprung up in the town, again, they could be seeing deer in their backyard and at the right angle shooting at it, thinking it was a winged creature. So I would lean toward that. I guess if I was on my deathbed and I had to pick it to save my life, I'd say probably an ultra-terrestrial of some sort.
Here's a little context on the meaning of the word ultra-terrestrial.
John Keel, from most notably the Mothman prophecies and other things, talked about ultra-terrestrials, and it's a broad theory, but it would contain things of, dimensional beings coming from other dimensions, or some people would even throw time into that mix, where they could be coming from different realities or different times. So a lot of people that's kind of a catch-all for, I don't know. And I mean, that's about as broad as you can get in that answer as well, that, you're trying to explain one mystery with another mystery.
Allow me for a moment to be the Scully to your Mulder, Gavin. There's no one theory that's going to explain all of the details from the accounts of 1903. But while doing research for this episode, I found information that points to turkey vultures as our beasts of burden, likely shouldering the blame for at least 3, possibly all 6, of the accounts from 1903. There's a specific behavior found only in turkey vultures that might serve as our smoking gun.
Of immense proportions.
But let's start with other things we know about these birds that either align with or possibly explain the details present in those accounts. The Van Meter visitor was widely believed to have lived in an abandoned coal mine outside of town. An abandoned coal mine would have the 2 most important things that turkey vultures look for when they're choosing a place to nest: cool temperatures and isolation from human activity. Other areas they're known to nest in include rock crevices, caves, mammal burrows, and abandoned buildings.
When you say abandoned buildings, I'm going to assume you're talking about the Platt Brick Factory here.
Right. Over the years, people have reported hearing inhuman sounds in both the coal mine and the abandoned factory. But since the factory was still open in 1903, this would only help to explain more recent accounts. What might also be important is the time of the year of the sightings, which was late September and early October. Turkey vultures do migrate, but not until mid-October, which might be why the sightings stopped after just a few days. They return in March, and in Iowa breed from March into June, which would also align with the reports of a second, smaller visitor. Another possibility comes to us from a study published in the Journal of Field Ornithology, which documents a communal roost of turkey vultures in northeastern Iowa. According to the book, crews working near the mine had been hearing sounds emanating from it for some time before the actual sightings. The article written by H. Phillips describes these sounds as though Satan and a regiment of imps were coming forth to battle. The journal article about the communal roost notes that the number of vultures present in the roost ranged from 20 early in the season to a peak of 281 on October 4th. There might have been a lot of turkey vultures living in that mine. It would certainly go a long way in explaining how H. Phillips described the sounds, and because the number of turkey vultures present in communal roost peaks in early October, an increase in general turkey vulture activity might make it more likely that there was more than one bird behind the original accounts.
Probably just 3 turkey vultures in a trench coat. Okay, here's what we've got so far. Turkey vultures are migratory birds, but they're native to Iowa and still present here in late September and early October, and they have been for many decades. The habitat of a turkey vulture would also be consistent with either a mine or an abandoned building. And they commonly roost in groups. This, as well as their mating patterns, could easily explain why a second, smaller visitor was spotted on that final day at the mine.
Sidney Gregg, at the beginning of his account, recalled how it moved about like a kangaroo with great leaps, sometimes using its wings to assist it. When the fast male came tearing through town, it crouched as if to spring, but ran on all 4 feet with wings extended and sailed away.
Now, this is interesting because earlier when we were talking about phantom kangaroos, we mentioned an account from a woman who said that it looked like a deer. And deers also have 4 legs, and here we have that again, ran on all 4 feet. But kangaroos have 2 legs.
The comparison to a kangaroo and the mention of great leaps and using its wings to assist it might be explained by the passage about turkey vultures in the Audubon Society Encyclopedia of North American Birds, which describes turkey vultures as awkward on the ground with an ungainly hopping walk. It requires a great deal of effort to take flight, flapping its wings while pushing off the ground and hopping with its feet.
Hey, so I got to cut in here, actually, because I just Googled how many legs does a kangaroo have, and I just found an article from BBC Wildlife Magazine that says, in 2014, scientists said that kangaroos have a 3rd leg masquerading as a tail.
You're telling me that kangaroos have 3 legs?
3 legs.
Could it be? Could it be that the possibility exists that the deadly phantom kangaroo is also the Van Meter visitor?
Or a turkey vulture?
Actually, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to Gregg's account, which gets even stranger when H. Phillips writes, rushing to the front door, he saw the monster descending the telephone pole after the manner of a parrot, using its huge beak. When it reached the ground, it stood erect and flapped its great featherless wings, standing at least 8 feet tall. Turkey vultures aren't 8 feet tall.
Yeah, they have an average height of 2.5 feet and a 6-foot wingspan.
The book mentions turkey vultures, and in 2 respects. The first addresses this height difference and points out that it would have been unlikely for someone to mistake a turkey vulture for being 8 feet tall. But there are a couple of things that might explain this. It could have been that the creature was standing on something, for instance, a mailbox. But maybe Sidney Gregg simply misjudged its height. It sounds like it's a pretty easy thing to do.
A recent article published by the National Audubon Society casts doubt on perceptions of size in situations eerily similar to this. It's about an experiment from a 2010 episode of the History Channel show Monster Quest, where a group of volunteers is driven down a dark road. Displayed on both sides of the road are plywood Mothman cutouts with bike reflectors for eyes. The volunteers are asked to guess the size of the cutouts, but none get it right. The man behind the experiment, Joe Nickel, an author and paranormal investigator with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, explains this by saying, "It's very hard to judge the size of something seen at night at an unknown distance. And if you misjudge how far away it is, you misjudge its height by the same proportion."
The second respect in which turkey vultures are mentioned in the book concerns the reports of featherless wings. While it's possible that a turkey vulture's featherless head was misreported as featherless wings, the book provides a plausible alternative, that a turkey vulture's dark feathers were behind the reports. And that makes a lot of sense. The last parallel that we can draw from Greg's account is the creature using its parrot-like beak, as if for balance, to climb down the telephone pole. It's a strange detail, but it turns out birds often use their beak for balance when they've lost the ability to balance naturally. This loss of balance is usually attributed to a condition called ataxia. Domestic birds suffering from ataxia will hook their beak into the side of their cage for balance. The two most common causes of ataxia are physical damage to specific parts of the bird and lead poisoning. Considering that bullets typically have lead in them and buckshot, which Peter Dunn used, is most commonly made of lead, maybe one of the bullets fired at the creature actually hit it and either physically injured it or caused lead poisoning.
Lead toxicity is still a major problem for wildlife today, particularly for scavenger birds, because they will eat dead animals that are shot with lead bullets by hunters and then left behind. There are actually some efforts calling for the removal of lead from bullets because of this. One I came across in researching the story was the Center for Biological Diversity's Get the Lead Out campaign.
Speaking of bullets, several of the accounts mention that the creature was unaffected by them. Chad Lewis, during our conversation, joked that maybe the men at the mine were the worst shots in Iowa. And he's right, the bullets just all might have missed. But given the claims of the men who were certain they'd hit it, that might not have been the case. Besides the forearm that extends from its body, a turkey vulture's wing is completely feathers. Hunters in modern times have written about the effects of gunshots in birds. If the bones in the wing are left relatively intact, its aerodynamic structure remains sound. This is especially true in larger birds. Some even have the ability to use their wings as effective armor plating. Some of those shots might have been on target, but flew either clean through the wing or did minimal damage to its structure.
Or maybe it was more of a direct hit that just didn't fell the bird, but it caused lead poisoning later on. But if you're out late at night with your shotgun and you encounter the Meter Visitor, you may want to think twice before firing your buckshot. Because if it turns out to be a turkey vulture, you could face penalties of up to 6 months in prison and a $15,000 fine under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918.
Another detail, present in 3 of the 6 accounts, might also have roots in the traits of a turkey vulture. The descriptions we have for the sound the visitor made could come from a turkey vulture's lack of a syrinx. This leaves them unable to make the sounds that almost all other birds can produce. They can only utter grunts and hisses. The work crews around the mine compared the sounds they heard to imps or Satan. Peter Dunn recalled a sound like someone choking, and in O.V. White's encounter, the sound was like 2 rasps grating against each other. A rasp is a large metal file, like a nail file, but bigger. Here's a clip of how turkey vultures sound, courtesy of the Outreach for Earth Stewardship, so that you can decide whether they sound like any of those things. we talked about a smoking gun of immense proportions. In the original accounts, the first mention of the creature's smell was by O.V. White, who experienced it after firing a bullet that he claimed woke it up. This stench was corroborated in the account of Sidney Gregg, who ran outside after hearing O.V. White's gunshot, and was also included in the accounts of the men who were guarding the mine. The men reported the smell after launching a barrage of bullets at the creature and its smaller counterpart. Turkey vultures naturally have a distinct putrid smell due to their diet of rotted meat. When 20 turkey vultures invaded a Florida vacation home in 2019, its owner described the smell as being, quote, like 1,000 rotting corpses. But beyond that, when threatened, turkey vultures, and only turkey vultures, will projectile vomit the partially digested remains of the already rotted corpses from their stomach. They can accurately hit a target from up to 6 feet away. One reason for this behavior is that it empties the contents of the bird's stomach, allowing for a quick transition into flight in case the bird needs to flee. But the primary reason lies in the stench of the vomit. So foul is this odor, no pun intended, that it works as an effective self-defense mechanism, warding off potential predators. A scenario where the bird, frightened by gunshots, activated this self-defense mechanism would explain both the smell and why O.V. White, Sidney Gregg, and the men at the mine didn't report the smell until after firing at it. Here's a clip of people standing approximately 20 feet from a turkey vulture, experiencing this unpleasant behavior firsthand.
And see, they vomit when they get upset. He just threw up. Mice. See, he just threw up again. Do you smell that?
By the way, that's something that's that's one of their defensive mechanisms.
Do you smell that?
Yeah.
Explaining the creature's foul odor is easier than explaining the beam of light said to be coming from its head. But we do know that a turkey vulture's head has 3 rare traits that might be relevant. Its lack of feathers, possibly allowing for reflection of light, a distinct hole in place of a septum, which light passes right through, and hollow nostrils that extend deep into its thin skeletal structure, which, when exposed to light, could produce the effect of illumination.
Any one of these features, or all of them, could have influenced the accounts of the light emanating from the visitor. If you're still skeptical, think of it in the context of the visitor's hopping movement, the sounds it made, and its foul odor, all of which are consistent with other traits of a turkey vulture. Likewise, the reportedly impervious nature of the beast could plausibly be explained by how a bird's feathers can withstand or deflect gunshots, or at least how a bird is sometimes able to still fly for a while after being hit. Or it could simply have been a case of poor marksmanship. If one of the bullets did strike the visitor, or if the visitor had consumed a bullet inside the carcass of an animal that was previously shot dead, ataxia caused by lead poisoning could explain why it used its beak for balance while climbing down the telephone pole. We already know that turkey vultures lived in Iowa at the time of the visitor sightings, and that they would have not all migrated by that time of year. Their communal roosting habits could explain both where the visitor was thought to have dwelled, and why multiple birds may have been mistaken for the antediluvian antagonist of our episode. Other discrepancies, like accounts of the visitor's featherless wings and imposing height, may have been a matter of poor visibility at night, coupled with the common tendency of people to misjudge distances.
Now that you know what we think, let's check in with Chad Lewis to see what he thinks of this theory.
I love it. And the thing is that you're 100% correct in the fact that there's no one theory that really seems to fit every little portion of this case. I think the beauty of this is that after so many years of researching it, I really still have zero idea what this thing could have been. So your guess is as good as mine. And I think it fits a lot of the categories that you ticked off. I mean, it blends quite perfectly. The only problems with some of it is that, O.V. White said it erased his memory, which is very, I don't know if it did or not, or how did he remember it erased it. And it's something I think Noah addressed in the book a bit with a lot of other big creatures that could have been misidentified.
One last thing. In the past, the idea of a big bird being behind these sightings has been dismissed because their feet, which have 4 toes, wouldn't match the tracks left behind by the visitor, which showed only 3. But birds with this foot pattern are very common, and they come in all shapes and sizes, from a chickadee to a falcon. So while the flat foot of a chickadee almost always leaves a distinct 4-toed footprint, the curved talons of a falcon, or turkey vulture, commonly leave behind a 3-toed impression, where their back toe doesn't show up. This means it's very possible that the 3-toed tracks left behind by the Van Meter visitor came from a 4-toed bird.
Admittedly, the light from the moon reflecting off of or through a turkey vulture's skull probably wouldn't be described as a blinding beam of light. But could discrepancies like this in the article written by H.H. Phillips be explained simply by sensationalized writing? After all, he also wrote about the men guarding the mine that the reception the creatures received would have sunk the Spanish fleet, and he described the sounds emanating from the mine shaft as though Satan and a regiment of imps were coming forth for battle. Phillips's article was published on October 4th, the day after the last sighting of the visitor. It was the source for every first-hand account over the previous 5 days. That is to say, it's the sole basis for the creature's entire origin story. The article was quickly called into question in 2 incredulous newspaper articles published on October 5th and 6th. If Phillips had fabricated the article, that alone could explain the mystery of the Van Meter visitor. If it were a hoax, did Phillips have co-conspirators? In the book, there is a photograph titled The Handsome Bachelors that pictures Phillips alongside 3 of the 6 men who first encountered the creature: Sidney Gregg, U.G. Griffith, and O.V. White. And in a small town of fewer than 1,000 people, it's not hard to imagine that Phillips was also acquainted with the other men whose accounts he published. Although it's unclear what their motive would have been, especially as prominent members of the community. Perhaps the headline of Phillips's own article alluded to deceit of one form or another.
Town of Van Meter wrought up over a fishy story.
The legend of the Van Meter visitor is some of the best lore that Iowa has to offer. Stories like this bring with them an element of whimsy, turkey vulture or not. And on that note, we hope that we weren't too harsh on turkey vultures. It wouldn't be fair if we didn't mention the vital role that they play in our ecosystem. While they allegedly terrorize small towns from time to time, it's important to remember that they make the world a cleaner and safer place.
So, a turkey vulture is our theory. But we'd love to hear what you think. Was it a prehistoric creature lost in time? An ultra-terrestrial being? Or is there a simpler answer, like just a burglar? We've got a poll up on our website, iowaoffkilter.com. There's a comment section there too, where you're welcome to go into more depth about your theory, rebut ours, or share your own experience with the unknown.
And if you're interested in checking out Chad Lewis's research or other works, there are multiple ways.
Of course, if you want to contact me or learn more, just go to my website, chadlewisresearch.com. Or, of course, you'll find me at the Van Meter Festival as well. Kudos to both of you. It sounds like you know an awful lot about the case. So, yeah, that was fun. Keep an eye out, guys.
All right, thanks. You have a good one. Thanks for joining us around the fire tonight. We hoped you enjoyed the episode. For more information, or if you'd like to help us chop wood, head to iowaoffkilter.com to find our Patreon information. But remember, support for our show doesn't need to be monetary. A like, a follow, a share, or a good review will go a long way in bringing awareness to the immense proportions of our podcast. The music you heard on this episode was performed and produced by Davenport-based musician Dirk Simis, as well as Des Moines artists Jordan Malin, Phil Young, and Diana Weizar. Big thanks to our boy Campbell D'Souza for his fantastic voice acting. And thanks to Chad Lewis for that extraordinary interview. Signing off, I'm Kelly Michael Bevins.
And I'm Gavin Aronson.
And thanks for coming round. Hey, I'm gonna run to the Jeep quick, get my headlamp.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
My God. What the hell is that thing?
It's the visitor! Don't let it get away!
Visitor! Visitor! A moment of your time? Sorry, Buzz. A moment of your time?
Oh shit, can you turn that down? How are you? Staying safe and healthy? That's true. I suppose your foul odor keeps them more than 6 feet away. Do you think that movies and like Jurassic Park and The Land Before Time have set unrealistic body expectations for cryptids and antediluvian monsters of immense proportions such as yourself?
There's the old Hollywood trope of the misunderstood monster where an unsightly beast is revealed to have a heart of gold. Do you find that to be offensive or even disarming to your fearsome reputation in today's more politically correct society?
Are you worried that with the fall of coal mines and the rise of renewable energy, are cryptozoological beings like yourself worried about the fast spinning blades of the modern wind turbine?
Like a kangaroo.
Did you see his wristwatch?